Hello everyone and welcome to CodeCast by STL Tech Talk, where we are going to bring you the content you want and need. Instructional, informative, unique, and insightful commentary on programming and technology. Coming to you live from Robots to Roadhouses, my name is JJ Hammond, and I am joined tonight with two coding experts. Up first, he has been involved with microcomputers and software since 1977. His career has spanned the industry both on the hardware and software sides. From manufacturing to sales, service, game development, line of business software, and large-scale systems, he's been deeply involved in creating new businesses around software, hardware, service, and products in a huge range of roles, including technical, management, and financing. During the halcyon days of the .com-boom, he was a consultant to venture capital firms providing technical due diligence and architectural direction. He is a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP. He's a partner in PWOP Productions, creating a variety of multimedia programs, including .NET Rocks, the Internet Audio Talk Show for .NET developers, the King, Richard Campbell. Hello, Rich, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks, JJ. Happy to be here.
Thank you. It's our pleasure, sir. It's our pleasure. But this show is not possible without the coolest guy I know, striving to bring development knowledges to the masses, and has spent the last 20 years architecting and implementing highly scalable ASP.NET applications, our very own Gus Emery. Hello, Gus.
Hey, JJ. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter, #CodeCast, or at STL CodeCast. Also, you can find us on Facebook, STL Tech Talk, Google+, subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Windows Phone, TuneIn Radio, or listen to us directly and live from the site. And don't forget to go to our site, where you can catch up with our tech news, podcast, CodeCast, find out how you can advertise with us, or hire us to consult you on your technological needs. And don't forget you can interact with the live show by sending us feedback to podcast@stltechtalk.com. And if you're watching us live, you can ask us questions via the chat room, and we'll do our best to answer those questions in a timely manner. A special thank you goes out tonight to Rich Dunbar. Thank you so much, sir, for last night's STL Tech Talk podcast episode, for giving us the breaking news from the Develop program for Windows Phone and the new Nokia X program. Normally, we do a code and programming demo, but tonight we're totally going to geek out on all things tech. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off the show with the first question, Richard. What got you into development technology, sir?
Well, you heard in the bio, it was 1977, and the most important thing that happened in 1977 was that Star Wars came out.
Sure.
So let's not harbor any illusions here. The important thing was Star Wars came out.
Right.
And I was 10 years old. But the first programming I'd ever done was actually on cash registers. My father's an electrical engineer designing electronic cash registers, so he had taught me from 5, 6 years old how to use a soldering iron. And as he was building cash registers, I learned to program those. But in '77, I met my first microcomputer. That was a TRS-80 Model 1. It had 4K of RAM and a cassette tape player and 3 error messages in a version of BASIC that Microsoft didn't make. It was a Dartmouth BASIC. And the error messages were, what? How? Sorry. Which are still some of the best error messages I've ever seen, because they're really honest. I mean, what's object not found but sorry?
Well, and tonight is Star Wars night at the Cardinals game, just to let all of our St. Louis local fans.
I am really stoked about Episode 7. There are such good things coming out about it. So, and J.J. Abrams, you know, is a god. The guy just keeps making great things. So, I'm hopeful.
You know, the new Star Trek. To get off topic for a second, the new Star Trek was fantastic. It was fantastic for people.
About what he did in that Star Trek. That this is the thing that grabbed me. He played the time travel card, and everybody who's a Star Trek fan
knew hard to do.
What to expect, right? We knew what was going to happen. We were totally on it, and then he messed with us. He said, "No, I'm not going to clean this up. You're going to have to live with Vulcan being destroyed."
Right.
Exactly.
That was a big move. I mean, it was huge. You know, it's like, you know what? I'm just going to take them out. Just almost completely wipe them out.
Oh, am I going to create a paradox by having old Spock and new Spock meet each other? Why, yes, I am, and I'm just going to live with it.
Yeah, well, there was enough time travel episodes in the Next Generation and all the other iterations of Star Trek that it's totally cool. It's within the norm for Star Trek.
Right. Well, but it's also play. You thought you knew it was going to like. How do you play off people who don't know the series because it's too long ago?
Oh,
Against the
sure.
people who are loyal fans and
Right.
not either lose with the first group or offend the latter group. And I think he struck that balance really, really well. And he's done the same thing with the Star Wars trilogies because I mean, 1977.
Mhm.
You know, that's a long time ago.
Oh, well, that and the thing that I liked is I had a couple of friends and coworkers that hated Star Trek or had never watched it, which I thought was unfathomable and was wrong, but still, whatever. That went and saw the new one and said, I didn't have to know anything about it. I learned everything I needed to know, and I enjoyed it because it was a good movie. The storyline was a secondary thing. I'm like, hey, that's exactly what I want to see in a movie, right? Especially when you're rebooting.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, he said he was going to reboot it, and he meant it. He really did. So
Yeah.
it's very exciting.
Yeah, and he made, and you know, I watched the behind the scenes on that because I was a huge fan of his as well. He made the general swag go back to, you know, Captain Kirk. You know what I mean? Like, because he had that swag going on, and now everybody kind of associates, you know, William Shatner with those silly commercials and different Priceline stuff that he does, but now, you know, you kind of got that original swag back to the captain's chair, and that was kind of cool, and just the general atmosphere that he creates with his actors and his directing styles, it's really hot. So I am totally stoked about the new Star Wars because I think he's going to bring a lot of that passion, probably a lot of emotional elements, sides of things to the characters and that, and really draw a good storyline. Because if there's one thing that we know from his productions up until now is the storylines are just really well done.
As long as he doesn't overthink them, and I'm looking at you, Lost.
I know.
Yeah, oh, good answer. Good answer.
So I'm curious to see if he finishes strong, because to me he starts off really well, but he never finishes strong. So you got to finish strong. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
So what got you into technology?
Well, I mean, I lived with it my whole life, right? I'm not I didn't learn it in college. I didn't do any of those things. I was a little kid in technology. I have never done anything else. My first part-time job was repairing those TRS-80s because I was good with a soldering iron, and I learned them early on. So by 12 years old, working after school, I was fixing them. And that's all I've ever done. You know, one form or another, I've just skipped from role to role, whatever it looked like. So I've been through so many different evolutions. And I still build all my own gear. This office, pretty much everything in it, I've put together myself.
So that being said, there's a story that I like hearing, and everyone's heard it before, but I'd kind of like to get a little spin on it. So there's this whole story about a little piece of hardware that you nicknamed Goliath.
Yes.
Back in the day. Why don't we talk about that era instead of the actual device itself, and talk about, you know, what happened back then, because that was the bulletin board scene, right?
Right, that's BBS world.
Yep, the bulletin board scene, which is kind of a little different than it is today, right? We've got the internet. Back then we had the bulletin board scene. But how do you see things changing, or even, how do I put this in the easiest, most lay way that I can? How do you see it kind of mimicking back in those days today?
Well, I think one of the things we lost because of the internet over this was the locality of it all. You know, BBS has only reached as far as telephone lines reached, in the sense of making local calls. You weren't going to make a long distance call to a BBS. It was really expensive back then. You know, the call prices are way cheaper now. And so when you were on a BBS, it was one person at a time, so there couldn't be more than 30, 40 people that could inhabit any given BBS, because you just couldn't get into it fast enough. I mean, eventually we got multi-line, but back then you just didn't have it. So it was a small community. Generally everybody knew each other. You know, there wasn't a lot of diversity there. It was very insular and localized, and you don't get that effect. You know, the upside of the internet is the long tail effect.
Sure.
Yeah, if you're really, if you're going to be one of the middle-aged men that's still into Sailor Moon, you can find the other 50 guys who think that's cool. You know,
My Little Pony. Oh my God, I saw a chat room for that, or not a chat room, but I saw a meetup group or something like that was about that. I'm like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah, the whole
They're
Little
called
Pony
bronies, JJ.
baffling, right? Like,
They're called what?
Everybody got their thing. And the internet lets that work, that you have enough reach to find those things. The only way that we made a BBS work is that you wouldn't hang out with on a BBS that didn't talk about stuff you cared about. So you ended up finding very small groups of people that liked similar things, and if that didn't work for you, you didn't go there. And so you ended up with 3 or 4 or half a dozen BBSs that you hung with that were topic areas that mattered to you.
Yes, exactly, and they were all topic areas too. I think that's one of the things that you had the personality. Whereas you may have a forum today on Harleys or electronics or something, but you have so many people funneling into that it's going so many different directions. There's no way to actually keep up with it, I don't think.
And I think the internet gives us a broad reach. There's the old comic, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? Yeah. Like it's just there's a level of anonymity now to the internet where anybody can get onto it, anybody can get to that forum, that you never had the same certainty. Where the skill set it took in that era of the 80s, if you could get to my BBS, you were probably someone I wanted to talk to.
For sure.
There just wasn't that many people.
What commercial was it where all those people are playing tennis, right? And I think it was Career Builder or something. And now that's kind of how the internet is, where you just got the one person vie for the job, and then you just have all these crazy people running onto the court, and balls are going everywhere, and there's a whole bunch of people, and it's just a mess. It's just a hot mess. And that's kind of where I think that it's going. And I'm a younger guy, and a lot of the people that I talk to that are trying to build out and kind of scale out and different stuff like that, because I kind of come a little bit from, my dad was an auto mechanic, so I did a lot of that kind of stuff, so I like very hands-on, a little bit kind of your path a little. But I really think that these Adrenos and all these other little kind of Raspberry Pis and all this stuff is it's kind of a good way to get those hands-on experience again. You may not be soldering a whole lot of stuff, but you are putting things together, and I think that that's a fantastic, not only a way to learn from the ground up. Everybody that I've talked to in this field who are and I'm not trying to inflate your ego already more than it already probably is, but you're a genius, and other guys like you guys all have the same thread, as you started off learning the basic foundation of the electronics, the hardware that it runs on, and how information gets from one point to another, and that's almost invaluable to completely wrap your mind around and understand.
Well, and that ended up really shaping my career. That the biggest opportunities I had was understanding the end-to-end problem.
Right.
I'm an okay programmer. I don't consider myself a great programmer. I've met enough great programmers that I'm like, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
What find me useful is I really understand hardware well. I understand software well. I've grown up with networking. I'm comfortable with databases. I'm good at putting the whole thing together and finding where the problems are.
Sure.
I'm a good diagnostician. I've had a lot of practice, and I think a lot of that is, I really avoid the genius moniker. I've been doing this for a long time.
Right.
If there's anything I've got that I've done right, I bled first.
Yes.
Right.
No skill. Yeah. I just stepped on it before everybody else did, and I remember what I stepped on. So now I can go back and tell. It's like, I would save you that pain. There's an easier way to do this.
Right.
I tend to agree with you too, because as I grew up, I was soldering, I was repairing computers, I was doing everything kind of like you in a little different sense. But it's also, so I know the entire gamut as well. But there's something to be said about having to deal with 64K of memory and coding in it as well, and being able to fit those buffers.
Yeah.
Software development, when the hardware was the constraint,
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of excuses too, right? You didn't have to. The fact that you could solve the case at all was enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things when I deal with folks that have had lots of experiences, they have these scars of that work of those era. They're over conservative with memory today. They're making things are taking 3 times longer than they need to because they're being very cautious with memory, because that's what they grew up with.
Right.
So they have a scar around wasting memory. And today I'm like, dude, you need to go faster.
Push it
through. Afford the memory. Don't worry, it's cheap. There's lots.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Push it through.
Yeah, but there's also that whole aspect on the other side of the code, and then we can get out of development a little bit, where you're looking for that speed, right? And the speed may be writing better code as well, or smaller, tighter, more compact code. So
Right.
it depends both sides, right? So you can, if you know both sides and you have both scars, then you wear it better and you're able to do better solutions, I believe, anyway.
So
Yeah, I think there's choices there and how you go about things. I think the big challenge is just being aware of what the current state, what the most important thing is today,
Yes.
and
Right.
that tends to change, and that challenges our skill set too.
yeah. Well, one thing that I kind of want our listeners to know, because we have a wide different kinds of listeners and things like that, but who may not know about .NET Rocks. Tell me a little bit about how you did get involved with .NET Rocks and that story behind that.
Well, I knew who Carl Franklin was long before he knew who I was, and he created the show. But even before he created the show, he put one of the very first websites up for Visual Basic.
Yep.
It's called Carl and Gary's VB homepage, and I hung out on that thing like that. I was a VB developer, and this was a great resource. In the trumpet windsock days of the internet. Oh boy, this was one of the few resources for a Visual Basic developer. So I always knew who Carl was, but we first met. So he started the show back in 2002. Which is brilliant. That's 2 years before the word podcast even existed, right? He was way ahead of his time. We met in 2004 at a conference, at the DevTeach conference in Montreal, and at speakers dinner, we're sitting at different tables, but I'm telling stories, and he came over to listen, and finally said, I think you should be a guest on my show, and I'm like, okay, whatever that is. Show? What is this show you speak of?
What TV channel is it on?
Yeah. So I was the guest on show number 69, which you can take from that whatever you want, and the co-host at the time was Rory Blythe, and it was a very geeky show, oddly enough. When we were talking about it, at that time, I was water cooling my PCs, and so we went through all these crazy technical subjects. But I had done radio in the past.
Oh, okay.
Conventional radio, I was on AM 1410. I did a talk show about computers.
Oh, wow.
So already sort of familiar with the model, and Carl and I, it's one of those things where you meet a guy, and I know we're not genetically related, but clearly somehow we're connected.
Right.
We're about the same age. We've got 2 daughters. We philosophically believe in a lot of the same things, so we never stopped talking.
Right.
And he had me involved. If you remember the shows from that era, they were longer. They were about a 2-hour show. They were more a variety show. There was some music, there was some comedy, and there was in the midst of all this technical interview.
Mm-hmm.
So he asked me to get involved in that show, adding gadgets. At the end of the show, we'd do a good toy and a bad toy, right? And the fun part was I'd listen to the interview as was going on, find out what that particular guest liked, and then go find a good toy and a bad toy related to what that person was interested in. So I was adding into those shows back in the variety model. But as Rory got too busy, and the same thing happened with Mark Dunn in the first 50 shows. So Rory was the second host in the second 50. So when he got too busy, Carl asked me if I would come in as the co-host, and that was show 100. And I figured, hey, the last 2 co-hosts that lasted 50 shows each, I can do 50 shows. That's easy. That's like less than a year.
Right.
Clearly gone terribly wrong with that plan, but
yeah. And how many are you up to now?
Just finished recording 1012, I think.
Oh,
God, that's insane.
It's a lot of podcasts.
yeah.
I think we just about got it figured out. We've been working on it.
Yeah.
I would hope so.
I've done 350.
Yeah, we'll get there. I mean, maybe 2000 we'll have it tweaked a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. One of the advantages we've had is being an early adopter, being first in. We're on a lot of people's lists.
Right.
So, the subscription base is fairly massive, and that's led to some sponsorship opportunities that have allowed us to allocate a non-trivial chunk of our day to making podcasts and to actually employ professional editors and pay for the epic amounts of bandwidth that distributing that much podcast costs.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, come to think of it, let me ask that question because it wasn't on my list, but now that it came up, how much bandwidth do you need to broadcast your podcast 3 times
So
a
we're
week?
running. We don't. We it's all recorded in advance and edited and published after the fact. We finally moved it into the cloud a few years ago. We haul about 18 to 20 terabytes a month.
Wow, that's a lot of downloads.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons to switch over to the cloud model because now you're paying for the byte rather than paying for the pipe.
Yes.
Right.
So when demand surges, which certain shows, certain times, you're gonna get this huge surge. We just serve more, and that works
Right.
out just fine. And the price per terabyte is about as low. The upside to the cloud model is they are clearly racing for the bottom in pricing.
Yes.
So even though our consumption goes up and up every month, prices have been going down once or twice a year since we switched over.
Yeah, it's the whole reverse auction deal, right?
Yeah.
Prices go down.
I'll give you a bit of ad, just in reverse.
So, Richard, where do you find your guests typically?
I work. You know who Larry David is?
Yeah.
The guy who worked with Seinfeld.
Yep.
He's the guy. He was the writer for a lot of the Seinfeld episodes, and I remember seeing an interview with him where he said every time we'd win a new season, he'd cry himself to sleep because he didn't know how the heck he was going to make 23 more of these stupid shows, right? Honest to God, I have that panic attack every other month or so. Still to this day, after all these shows, I still get that. How are we going to do more of these things? So I'm a OneNote guy. I have reams and reams and reams of OneNote on all kinds of stuff because I have this advantage. I make so much content now. I get to think about content every day. It's not just the 208 podcasts a year. I work on a dozen conferences. I own 2 of them. I help editorial planning for a lot of different folks. And most of my customers, when I'm doing consulting, they care about future thinking too. So I've sort of built a business around thinking about what developers are going to care about 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and 9 months from now. So it's just a constant stream of planning that goes on all of the time. And the side effect of that is Microsoft and other companies feed me what they're up to because they know we're going to reach a lot of people. So it's useful for them to know to sort of have stuff planted on me. So I have a pretty good picture of what's coming in the next 6 months. And I'm not allowed to talk about that in advance, right? I'm under NDA. But if I can craft a story arc to help the listener be ready when those announcements actually land, so you won't be surprised. And an example I can give of this is Link. If you go all the way back to 2006, and I've been involved with .NET for a couple of years at that point, I got an opportunity to talk to Eric Meyer, who's one of the scariest smart people you'll ever meet. I mean, just staggeringly smart. And we were talking about what generics was going to do and this whole mindset around abstracting generics that way. And I thought, well, how am I going to present this? And so we talked about a lot of the core concepts involved. And we made shows around those things so that on the day that Link released, the listener is not surprised. They don't know what the technology is called, but they're like, oh, yeah, well, if you think about this, you think about this, you think about this, then this all makes sense. So in that sense, I have a half a dozen story arcs going all of the time based on various deadlines for various technologies that are coming. Then how do you structure the shows themselves? So what are the core topics you're going to need to reach and go find people who can do those core topics? But then you also have cornerstone personalities. Look, if Anders Halsberg wants to come on your show, he can talk about whatever he wants. All want to listen to him.
Right.
If Anders wants to read out of the yellow pages, I bet we could take a half hour out of that.
And I'll bet you'd spike your downloads too.
Yeah. Well, he's just one of those guys, right? Like there's certain personalities where that's always interesting. And we're happy to do that. But most of the time, I'm on the hunt all the time. And I read a lot of blogs. I'm a very fast reader.
That's good. Yeah.
I read a lot of blogs. I read a lot of I check out conferences all the time. I'm always looking for up and comers.
Right.
There's always, and you've noticed with my roster, I find folks on a regular basis that I think, this person's interested. They're really engaged in the community. They've got some good thinking around this. Let's get a story from them here, and then sort of open the door for some opportunities. More people need to be seen. This is a synergistic business.
Yes, totally.
1 + 1 = 3. The more people we can have lifting the tide, the higher the tide goes.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and the quality. Yeah, and the quality of people, and like you said, I think it gives it. It's now you guys are to a point to where it's such a platform that you can give those, like you said, opportunities to people that they may not have had before.
Like the Corey Houses and people like that. That guy's wicked smart.
And working really hard too, right? Like cracking some tricky problems, and for me, like the Corey House is a great example. I met him at the Norwegian Developers Conference, and his talk was about an applied spa. He was talking about an app he'd built. Well, I've had lots of conversations about spa from the technologist perspective, right? The Ward Bells and John Pappas of the world, who are great guys, but they're mostly focused on building tools to make things easier, and they're thinking really hard about it. But I can relate so much better to a guy who's been in the field and said, okay, here's the tool set I use to build this app.
And this is how I do it, yeah.
And my favorite part of that whole conversation with Corey is the compromises he made.
Right.
His customer was using a VB6 tabbed view app, and by golly, they wanted a tabbed view spa, which all of us are going to cringe about because we believe in the HTML5 clean flow look and feel of things. But if the customer doesn't want it, doesn't matter. The fact that the tools could still deliver what the customer wanted, that to me was the most important message out of that show.
Yep. No.
I was just going to say, it's kind of like, when you look at the manager and he's sitting there all nice and clean and sharp, whatever. He's like, and talking. But then you look behind him, you see this guy, and he's really working hard, and you're like, that dude looks like he's been in some down, and he's got the 1,000-yard stare thing going on. Like he's like been in the trenches, And I want to talk to that guy because he's the one who is solving problems, and I want to know how they're doing it. So that's really.
Although, I mean. I love a grounded grassroots guy, but he is always a lagging indicator. He knows what has happened, not what's coming, right?
Right.
The trick is, if you're going to actually understand a space, you have to ask the right questions to the right people. You don't ask the manager for history and context. You ask them for the future. Because that's what they are managing to leading indicators, right? That this is where the industry is going. These are the goals we need to reach. Those are the things they worry about. Now, if you don't have the back end, you're just lying to yourself. You're running on the dream. But you can't just live on the back end either. You need both stories to actually have a picture of how to serve an organization best. And if I'm going to come in there and actually help them with the architecture and move the ball forward, you better talk to both of them.
Yeah, well, you're 100% right. And not to get off on a different tangent, but next week Corey House will actually be on our show, but not talking about the spa app, talking about his Outliers talk.
Awesome.
So if you haven't seen that talk, by the way, he's fantastic.
Yeah, we love. I listened to. We talked to him at stlouisdays.net, and that was a lot of fun. And he's just a heck of a guy. And that's awesome too when you meet awesome people. And I've never talked to other people in an industry like this so much that loves to talk about what they do, right? Yeah. And that's what's really cool. So I just wanted to ask this question just because I would think that this is a kind of, since you've done so many shows, how do you keep up with the demand of shows? Because having a huge following that you have, having almost like the psychotic listeners, if you will, the ones that would, maybe cut their wrist a little bit if you didn't do some shows for a while or quit altogether. How do you deal with all that?
Well, very cognizant of the fact that if I'm an hour late publishing a show, I get email.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, they're very enthusiastic listeners that value it a great deal. And part of it is there is a part of the value of constructing a show like this is that it's cadence. That it has to keep coming out. I have no inclination to stop. And it is a sustainable business. Let's harbor no illusions here. I'm not doing it just out of the goodness of my heart. I have paying sponsors who expect the show to be out. Exactly. They're not as diligent as the listener is when I'm late. I think if I was late a day, the sponsor might notice. But if I'm off by an hour, the sponsor's got other things to do. So I mean, in that sense, it is a working model. I think that's important too, that we're able to maintain a quality and so forth because it works. We're not stressed about any of that, keeping in a steady flow. the big thing that's been for me is alignment in all the things I do. But the hardest part about this whole process is making shows that are relevant to the listener. So that means you got to stay connected to the listener, right? It's reading a lot of email and reaching out to folks and going to conferences and talking to them and making sure we're not too far off in the ivory tower. I mean, I like a good future look show, but sometimes you need to haul that back and just, like we said with the Corey show, it wasn't the fanciest show, but it was really grounded in what's real.
Yep. Right.
And so part of that is, I think, some folks want to see what's going forward. Some folks want to be sure they're okay. Like, we can hit all of those things.
Yep. I'm going to take a little sidestep on that, because one of the things that I've heard from some of my colleagues is that they don't like going to conferences now because most of the conferences are all pointed for future, not current or past.
Yes.
So even the conferences I've seen in the last couple of years have kind of taken a step back from everything being, MVC5 to MVC4 is okay, or last year's technology just because people haven't touched it, right? Yep. But just a supplement in there anyway. How do you do you agree with that?
I own Dev Intersection, so I'm not going to hide any of the truth here. I make Dev Intersection for a mainstream developer. Right? That is the focus of the content. I think it's important for us to show the light of where things are going. But if you don't show the path to it, you're just losing people, right?
Gotcha.
So it's not so much I need to tell you about how to use WinForms, because I bet you know, right?
Right.
But to show you a path from WinForms to WPF, which is not a sexy session. Right? That is a meat and potatoes. Like, a sexy session is showing off the carousel and building fancy WPF apps, right? Which is, first, if I just ask speakers, like, give me your favorite sessions, they're going to all give me cool stuff. But when I actually can go to a guy like Miguel Castro and say, dude, help me help my attendees who are working in WinForms understand how to get to XAML, he can do that.
Yeah.
Right? And he makes a great session. My listener, my audience gets a great session. Like, everybody's better off for that. I think it's the job of a content share to actually put those pieces together and give us a direction on all that. Commit to where your audience is and where they want to be.
I totally agree with you. Being a speaker myself, and putting abstracts out and seeing the ones that are picked and the ones that aren't, and me going, huh? What? Really? Sometimes, whereas I've got content that I think would be great for the mainstream masses because that's where I work, and conferences just go, no, not really interested in that. I much prefer Dev Intersections because, or at least what I've seen. I'm not saying that because I speak at other conferences too, and I love their content, but I have seen what you've done where you kind of have stepped back from that bleeding edge limelight just slightly, and I do appreciate that as a developer.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's a balancing act too. I have sponsors at the conference who want to, we got to do a reporting session every single show, right?
Right.
Reporting hasn't been sexy for 20 years. Nobody's selling anything new in reporting, but I guarantee you there's not a single attendee at that show that doesn't have reporting in their life.
Yes.
Right.
So, how I got to argue with a Microsoft sponsorship about, no, we'll be doing a session on reporting because that's what the audience wants and they're paying.
Well, yeah, I've been doing MVC sessions since 2008, late 2008 at VS Live and elsewhere, and I still get asked, can you do a workshop for beginners? And I look at them and go, what? and it fills every single time, and I'm always amazed that there are that many people that don't,
The fundamentals of service orientation, right? Because SOA was a fun buzzword in 2006, but today, in the heterogeneous client world with all the mobiles and the browsers and so forth, if you're not got services in your back end, you're in trouble.
And they're just hitting that too in corporate America, to be completely honest.
Yep, they're slamming into it now. Now they finally are being shown the reason they should have done that, and they're ready to catch up. The funny part is they're also going to get a benefit from it because we did a lot of twists and turns getting to good SOA implementations in .NET. I think we got it nailed now. You can actually greenfield a project. Let me introduce you to Web API. You're going to have a good time.
Yeah, no, and to wholeheartedly agree with you. And it's the speed to release too is almost instantaneous on that. I mean, you can have a really good, service dumping code back to something within minutes. It may not be the implemented one, but how long did it take in 2006 to make that?
Yeah, no, it was a lot trickier. And you're right. We're in this interesting point now where now the question is how much work you're going to get the client to do versus what is the server going to own. The other piece that I'm finding is taking more and more energy is how many cycles are you going to put into improving your development infrastructure?
Yep.
Right.
Now, I have this good fortune of having to live I'm only living 2.5 hours away from the Redmond campus. I'm in Vancouver. I'm actually in a suburb called Coquitlam. I can drive down to Microsoft in the morning.
I'm jealous.
Me too. Got some perks. So I was talking to a couple of the senior studio guys, and they said one of the things I'm finding from the audience is since 2010, Studio 2010, people are upgrading because it's a seamless upgrade. But they're not using any of the new features. It's just a faster version of 2010.
Yep.
And the question I asked them is, do we actually have to make a breaking version of Studio to get people to pay enough attention to actually take advantage of what's in the new Studio?
That is a possibility. Good. I never even thought of it that way.
Well, and I'm wondering if we're heading for one. And I know nothing on the inside about this, but I feel like the move to 5, because I think we're due. I don't think there's going to be a 4.5.2. I think there's going to be a 5. And that's probably going to have some bumps in it that people are going to have to pay attention to.
I would tend to agree with you wholeheartedly. And I would see sometime probably in the next 2 to 3 years, and this has nothing to do with Microsoft or anything like that, I think we're going to see a big road bump in development technology, period. I think there's going to be a change or a switch, a little bit anyway. Yeah, I've had that feeling for a while. It's
the rewrite of C# is we did a whole show with Mads Torgersen around this, and Torgersen just reinforced what I was already thinking. We're at a renaissance for C# by rewriting C# in C# and making it open source. You're pretty much doing anything you want. That language can go any direction you want to go in, and it's pretty much agnostic to the platform now. It's pretty much agnostic to its library set. The possibilities there are quite shocking. When they finally release that, that's not going to be profound. It's going to be good, but it's not going to be profound. No. The version after that one, crazy is really going to land.
Exactly.
If you're going to take development in a different direction, it's going to happen there.
Well, speed and deployment and implementation, obviously, we're going to, that's going to be faster.
That has to be. Yep.
I think it already is. For certain folks who have shaken off the cruft around them of the way they're currently building and deploying software and looked at what's out there today, looked at how you can use, and I'm not saying go to the cloud, but use the cloud approaches to building stuff, that high level of automation all the way through right to deployed, in package form, where would you want to install this? That just, when you get that right, and you're really confident in it, like you could deploy that software, it's sufficiently tested and it's built correctly and everything you need to actually deploy it is all there, it's very empowering. It changes the way you build software. I've got some customers now who basically don't have version numbers anymore because there's a new build going up 2, 3, 4 times a day. And they just, why would we count those build numbers? It's just a constant flow.
Sounds kind of like the TFS team, doesn't it? With the Visual Studio Online, pretty much updates consistently.
Yeah, well, and you go back to the Exchange guys. Like the reality of Microsoft Exchange, not that Exchange is a fun-filled piece of software. It's one of the few things Microsoft makes that I'm still deeply afraid of. You do. They are constantly
I have a healthy fear
on the cloud, and then every so often they take a cut of that and say this is going to be the deployable version of Exchange again.
Yep.
Package it up and test it on other people's hardware to actually get it out there. At some point, they're going to stop. Because let's face it, if you're running your own mail server, you're a nut. Which I'm one of those nuts. I'm still running my own Exchange server because I want to be able to look an Exchange server administrator in the eye and say, I feel your pain. But
I physically have one
in a couple more years, there's just going to be no excuse. Like, it's getting ridiculous. I'm going to upgrade to Exchange 2013, and I think that's the last one. After this, it's going to the cloud.
I've actually got Exchange up myself in my house. I don't use it as my primary anymore, but it's still up. I'm scared to get rid of it. because once I get rid of it, I'll need it. I've got two quick questions. They're kind of compound. One is, do you have 5 tips for beginning podcasters that you would have right off the top of your head or at least a couple that they should do? And secondly, any equipment that you recommend?
Yeah, well, the tips start with, keeping stuff really simple. Okay. Skype's good enough. We use Skype most of the time. I have a Telos hybrid for using phone lines still, but that's a very expensive toy. And when Skype fails you, it's really a problem. There are simple microphones, like buy a better mic. The mic that's in your laptop isn't going to cut it. Yeah, the little Rode microphone that's got the USB plug, so you don't need a separate digitizer, that's a pretty good choice. The thing you see beside me here is an AT2020. It's about a $100 mic. I replace it every couple of years because you wear it out.
Right.
But there's not much more to it than that. But to use a mic like this is to have a separate preamp, a separate digitizer with a FireWire feed into a PC. That's more elaborate than a lot of folks need. Heck, just a small portable recorder like the the H2N. That's a great little 2-channel recorder that'll do a lot. The most important thing if you're going to get into podcasting is be reliable. And the minimum cycle is a week. Because Western humans are built around a weekly behavior. It's how we think. And so if you commit to a day a week that you're going to put up a show, and do it. It's the only way that I've ever found to build an audience. We do more than that a week, but that's because there's enough material, there's enough interest, there's enough sponsorship that we can go faster than that. But less than a week and you just can't build anything.
Yeah, and consistency. Yeah, for sure. I mean, me listening to a bunch of podcasts, because I'm a huge fan of podcasts, and we have 2 podcasts. So one of the things for me is which I know this is totally like a vain thing or whatever, but it's like, come on, give me a show. I want a show. You know what I mean? I need to fill my drive time, or I need to fill, when I'm doing the laundry and the dishes and the cleaning the house, whatever the case, or like I'm outside and I'm sawing off this tree that actually I still need to do. But, I want to be listening to you guys, and I can't because the new show isn't out, and so that's kind of a gripe that I've had, but yeah.
If the challenge here is you make a commitment like that and you miss it, especially if someone is now used to listening to you on the way to work on Wednesday morning, and you're late, the disappointment level is palpable, right? Like that's easy to remember. For better or worse, we're better at remembering the things that went wrong than the things that went right.
Absolutely.
It's a part of that Neanderthal brain still in us that's worried about everything that goes wrong. So vitally important.
So to get off the topic of podcasting, because I think we've talked about it enough and we're all sick of it, what other types of tech are you enthralled by? I mean, what do you do every day in tech that you like to do that you don't, when you get to do it?
Deep down, I'm still a hardware guy, and if the Geek Out episodes for me on the podcast side are the hardest work I do for the podcast these days. I am very much enthralled by the reducing cost of a .NET capable stack of a PC machine. Smaller, cheaper, and the proliferation of them. It wasn't that long ago that a PC was a precious device. There was one of them in the house. It had its own space. It was very well protected. And you were careful with it, right? There's plenty of households I met where you had to wash your hands before you used the keyboard.
Right.
Bad policy, because keyboards get gross. But today, I have 5 machines wrapped around me sitting at this desk. Your phone is effectively a PC, and it's going to really be a PC in the next generation or two. The proliferation of tablets, I'm at a point now where there's pretty much a tablet in every room in my house. And admittedly, I'm an extreme case.
Absolutely.
Regular mortals today have multiple computers, and part of that is the price is going down and the form factor starting to shrink. So I think the world we're coming into is one where the proliferation of PCs is everywhere, and the main goal is that your identity, the way that you want to look at a machine, follows you from machine to machine. Ultimately, the ownership of the device itself is going to become irrelevant because there's just so many of them. It's not that big a deal.
Right. It's that following you around and the different form factor. In fact, I was at a funeral today, and I would say 3/4 of the attendees were looking down at their devices. So it's one of those that it follows you around, much like, it's the internet. I know people hate the term, but the Internet of Things stuff, but it is more about, I know where you are. You can lose this device, you can lose this device, but yet all of my settings are saved and everything's following me from all of my different devices, and that's what really is exciting for me as both a dev and kind of what the future holds, and both healthcare and education and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
I think another important piece on this is that general computing hardware, the commodity hardware, is fast enough for everything we need to do now. So take a look at the example of video game machines. The Xbox 360 and the Sony PS3 both were custom hardware. They were totally unique pieces of hardware. They built their own chips for them. It made them expensive. It also made them difficult to develop for.
Right.
And in the end, they still couldn't keep up with a PC. The new generation devices, the Sony PS4 and the Xbox One, are back to conventional hardware. And there's a reason for that. It's actually cheaper, and it's easier to develop for. So you start looking at stuff like Netduino and some of the other ultra-miniaturized Intel SoC, system-on-a-chip designs.
Yes.
They're getting to the price point now where it's cheaper than the custom hardware that runs your dishwasher. So why wouldn't you just put the SoC right in the dishwasher, which means suddenly my appliance has a web server in it.
Right.
And I could talk to it directly, and I could program it easily on a model I already understand.
Right.
That's the disruptive point when we use conventional hardware and conventional programming approaches for everything. That's what actually makes that Internet of Things take hold.
Right.
We don't have to create. We've been trying to create a new standard for lightweight computing devices for years, and the battle has always failed us. In the meantime, the hardware has come down and down and down on the current patterns that we already understand and value, so that we can run them there. So I think that's the next few years, is that intersection point, and it's why the IoT debate and battle is heating up so much. Is that all the smart people are involved in this, the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts of the world, see it coming and know they got to ride that wave or they're going to have problems.
Yeah, and services, and keeping up with the services. One thing that a lot of people get frustrated, a lot of like new kids, and because I'm coming out of college and all that kind of jazz. Everybody's developing on a Mac, or they're they're using Google software, developing Java for Android, because there's free services and it runs on devices that are all over the place. You know what I mean? And it's really interesting to see everybody start to kind of fight now for here's the tools that you can have, so that my washer's done washing, my dryer's done dry, or I can turn those things on from my phone or my tab, whatever. I could be away from the house, the connected home, and all these different things of the future that are what kids and going into classrooms and doing different stuff like that. We see that. What gets kids excited, and they're building these little robots and stuff out of all these different things. We talked with Scott Hanselman about that a couple weeks ago, and that's the future, and they got to figure out how to brand it, right? Like, how do they keep their identity on a chip, right? Like, or speak to a developer.
It needs to follow, the identity needs to follow us really well. I think we got really abstract a few years ago in computing, that it was too complicated, too abstract for most people to deal with. And we're coming back around to a very maker cycle again.
Yes.
Because the younger generation relates to making. We celebrate makers, right?
Right, we do.
Culturally, we like people who make things, and so more and more we're seeing the resurgence of Lego, although one would argue Lego's never gone away.
No.
But .NET, Gadgeteer, Netduino, like all of those electronics, all of the robot kits are about making things, because programming isn't interesting unto itself.
Right.
It is interesting only in the context of what it does. Now, that's not necessarily true for us, because we are programming immigrants. We remember a time before programming was possible. And so, in introduced to it for the first time, the fact that we could control a machine was a very profound thing.
Right.
But for a 12-year-old boy today who has never lived a moment of their life without internet, without cell phones, without that sense of connectivity and computing, they are programming natives, and it's just not that interesting. unless you put in the context of something that is more interesting, it's more applicable in that space. The native immigrant story is a really interesting one. Like, my experience with that originally was watching my grandmother's reaction to me opening the fridge for more than 10 seconds. Because she remembered a time before refrigerators. So when the refrigerator was open, that was a big deal.
So my dad still lights me up. My dad still lights me up when he comes into my house. It's too cold in here. I mean, what are you doing, son? And I go to his house, and I swear to God, I lose weight when I'm there. You know what I mean? So he's still got the oscillating fan. Everybody, every comedian talks about that oscillating fan because we all know, because we're like, that was our air conditioning. You know what I mean? But I mean, I think that goes, and I think that speaks to what you're talking about.
Well, and I think it's an important, once you recognize you're an immigrant, they're a native, you are never going to look at it the same way.
Never.
You are going to be more excited than they are about it, ever, right?
Right.
It is. And you're going to have to connect with them on a different road. Like, that's an insurmountable hurdle. So don't worry about it.
Right.
Accept that they are going to perceive it differently, and that they're never going to be excited about the same things you're excited about, and tackle it that way. And
okay.
Right?
Totally agree. I would totally agree.
So off of this real quick, I really want to stay in this vein because it's interesting to me, so whatever. But no, I want to know what frustrates you when you're out in the field, you're talking with people, and you're like, God, you got talent, but you're just doing the wrong thing. Like, what would you say is the wrong language that people are playing around with, or just like mistakes that you see people making in the field like that?
I think you battle with, you've had success one way, so you presume that's the only way to have success.
Right. Kind of like a storefront, like the old school way of thinking, I'm going to make money by having a store, a physical location. Right. That's not true anymore.
Well, there are folks who can have success that way. The question is, do you understand the whole problem? So
okay.
I think there's a bigger piece about just taking a step back and saying, all right, I've had some, it's easy to work with someone who's never written an app successfully before. They're willing to listen. When you've got a couple of apps out the door and you followed a pattern, you're going to be pretty keen to keep following that pattern. The idea that there are other ways to go about it, you really have to struggle with that. So the sticky part is thinking you've got it nailed, because it doesn't work that way. The evolution is pretty rapid, and if you really build apps the same way over and over again, you're probably leaving some things behind.
Right. Like the guys and gals who get stuck on a particular template, right? Our framework that they said, man, I'm just going to do this the same, and they keep pushing that out and so resistant to change. So that's what you would say to stay away from?
Well, there's a trap you get into. If you hang your identity around a technology, if it happens to be a new technology, then you're going to be a leader in your field for a couple of years, and then you're going to be mainstream. And then, hey, you're just the next generation of COBOL programmer, right? You're now the guy maintaining the old system, right? But if you're going to be a professional, if you're a developer and you care about building great software, you're agnostic to technology.
Right.
What's more important is how you think about solving problems and looking at new sets of tools to solve them. In some ways, this was easier in the old days when our tools changed so rapidly. But as much as we are advancing things in the .NET world, .NET's been around 12, 13 years. That's a long time. And it is actually morphing. But if you focus on the fact that you code in C# and don't think about anything else, you can ignore that. Not that I have anything wrong with C#, but if you're not actually grappling with what's evolving in C# and the underpinnings that are changing around it, the way the libraries are changing, the way the runtime has changed, you're missing out on the bigger picture of how things are still shifting.
Yeah, not to mention all of the different libraries that are available to extend it, right? I mean, everything.
Yeah. You may or may not, there's been a plethora of libraries in the Java space, the JavaScript space, for a reason. They're feeling around for the best way to build smart apps where the host environment is the browser.
Gotcha.
It's a feeling around. Today I would argue that the Angular approach seems to be the most mature one. But it's a feeling around process. It's never certain. It'll be obvious in hindsight.
Yeah.
So
well, and a year ago it was knockout.
If you're willing to jump on and be part of the experiment, great. If you're not, there's a reason to hold back and let other people do the evolution for you. But you should be paying attention.
Definitely. I mean, a year ago it was knockout, right? Knockout was the leader, and then all of a sudden Angular came out of nowhere, and that's all people are talking about now.
Well, and it came out of somewhere. It came out of the limitations that Knockout had, and a need to manage binding a little more differently, and how do we sustain state, and how do I avoid those round trips? Like, there was a bunch of things they were cleaning up, right? I really appreciate we just published the show with Rob Eisenberg, where he was going down a path with Durandal that was going down the same path that Angular was going down, and so they're going to work together.
Yep, I was just listening to that today, and he was talking about that, yeah.
And what a great story, right? That we're not just making libraries for library's sake, but we're really trying to solve a problem, and putting the best minds on the same problem is the best way to solve it.
No, totally agree. Totally agree. So, Richard, I've got a couple more questions for you before we get out of here. The first one I'd like to ask, I'm going to twist one of your own back on you. Hopefully you don't sue me for copyright or trademark. But if you had $5,000, what would you buy in hardware and software for your office?
Oh, man. You know, I have a handful of answers around that. There's lots of different things that I've looked at. So for $5,000 today, the one device we still haven't got in the house is some kind of 3D printer.
Okay.
And believe it or not, for my household, I would use it the least.
Really?
My wife, my daughters, all serious CAD/CAM folks. My wife works in the CAD side of clothing manufacturing, so she knows that cold. Both my daughters are very maker-crafty folks. They would make digital renderings of everything. But I would not go down the ABS PLA plastic drip style. I would use the resin laser style. And for $5,000 now, I can actually get a resin printer that will make a higher quality image. The thing is that I see 3D printers very much like inkjet printers. You're not going to print your book on an inkjet printer. You might make one draft on it, but that's all you're going to do. What's just starting to form now in a few places, you find this down in California and so forth, is use your 3D printer to make your prototype, and when you're ready, you can send it to the equivalent of a quick copy or you know, the UPS store to make a real version of it using your model out of metal or out of something more permanent than the resin.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's good, and you know, I would probably make just the most ridiculous. If I had a 3D printer, no, I'm not going to go down that road. If I had a 3D printer, I would make all sorts of just crazy, outlandish things, and I wish we had a chance to talk about drones and atom bombs and all the stuff that you guys have been talking about on .NET Rocks, because man, those were some good shows.
Well, thanks. The Atomic Weapons show was the last big geek out I did. I really suffered for it. I think I battled with a bout of depression for about a week after that show.
Well, the one with internet Wi-Fi, open Wi-Fi alone will make you just go into a corner and cry.
Oh, every time you talk to Troy Hunt, I curl up and do it.
Oh, I know.
That guy just does that to me. He's evil that way.
Yeah.
Australians, man, watch out for them.
I know, right? Yeah, at first they get your women by the accent, and then you're next. No,
They destroy your networks.
Yeah, then they destroy your networks, and you're like, who did that? It was the China. Nope, it was the Aussies.
Hop over onto the Run As Radio channel, my other show, the IT show. I recently put up a show with a nice Polish girl by the name of Paula Janowski, and you think Troy scares you. Paula will horrify you. She talked about a device called a rubber ducky. It's a USB key that is not a USB key. It's actually a keyboard, but it doesn't have a keyboard attached. It's shaped like a USB key. So I plug it into your machine, and because your machine is set up to auto-install anything plugged in the USB port, it just recognizes the keyboard, and it just starts firing keystrokes and sucking everything out of your machine.
Oh, wow.
That would... Yeah. God, I'm already like tinfoil hatting it, you know what I mean? That's insane. So, what do you see? We have our guest always pick a question at the end of the show. What do you see as the next technological changing within the next 3 to 5 years?
I think the ubiquity of computing and the whole conversation we just had around the effects of the beginning of IoT is going to be really interesting. But if I was to grab another geek out, we're already seeing the laws passed. I think we're going to see the first generation of automated cars on the roads in certain cities in the next 5 years.
And how do you see that affecting us?
I think mostly for the better. We all want to be on our phones while we're driving anyway. Now you don't actually have to drive.
We don't have crazies on the road, is that what you're saying?
With the automated driving show, and I think the bunch of the summary pieces that we dug into on that they'll take over the HOV lanes. They'll be allowed to drive faster. You probably won't own one. You'll just rent it on demand. That means you can rent any kind of vehicle. If it's just you going to work, take the 2-seater. If you've got a bunch of friends you want to go out for the evening, take the 6-seater. You need to carry some stuff, you get a pickup truck, like whatever kind of vehicle you need is the one you'll get.
Good.
They'll be having experienced Uber before. I now understand how much better that is in terms of travel. So Uber with an automated car with ride sharing and maybe some isolated pods is really interesting. There's a cascade on this. I think it'll take a hold in heavy trucking first.
Totally agree.
Allowed to drive more than 10 hours in a day, but an automated vehicle will drive 24 hours a day. So right away, you're cutting delivery times in half. Now you can have cities mandate no large trucks on the road during rush hour at all because they drive all night. So we can actually reduce friction in driving. We can deliver stuff more reliably. Truck drivers right now, make no mistake, have incredibly good safety records. They are way safer than a conventional driver. This will step it up another notch.
Yeah, we just recently had 2 unfortunate casualties here in St. Louis due to tractor, the big hauls trucks and it was terrible. But not saying the machines won't make mistakes, but when you lower the percentage of chance of making those mistakes and stuff, that's beneficial.
There's a subtle thing here. Right now, your airbag is so powerful because it needs to deploy after your car is hit.
Right.
So if your car is covered in sensors so that it knows you're going to be hit fully a second before you're hit, there's a whole bunch more things it can do to protect you than it can do in the millisecond it's got after the car's already taken an impact.
Right.
So there's a bunch of things that make your vehicle way safer once you put that level of automation into it.
When you say that, I picture Sandra Bullock in the I can't remember what was it where the car gets into the accident and it fills with like styrofoam.
Oh no, that was Demolition Man.
Yeah,
Demolition Man. That's what it was. Yep.
That was with Stallone and Snipes. That was hot back in the day.
Actually, it was a terrible film, but the world they lived in was hilariously good.
Oh no, it was a terrible film for sure, but I'll watch it again. I still liked the movie. It's one of those things. It's like I don't know. I can't get enough of those '90s films.
I love the 3 shells gag in that.
I know the 3.
The 3 shells gag was brilliant. It's never explained. It's just brilliant. But the film itself, the fun part is I don't think anybody doing it took it. Like Snipes was clearly playing a character and having a good time playing it. Like it was just a funny show.
Right.
But they do interesting pieces of that. Anyway, you asked me what's 5 years out. I think we're only 5 years away from automated driving starting to take a hold on regular streets.
That's cool.
That would be cool. So Richard, why don't you tell our audience where they can find you, listen to you, tweet with you, whatever.
So the Twitter handle is @RichCampbell. Pretty easy to find. .NetRocks.com is the big show, 3 a week, just over 1,000 episodes out now. For the IT-minded folks, I do Run As Radio, and we're at about 370 of those once a week on Wednesdays. And the other initiative that's important to me, and we never got to it at all this time around, but I'll just mention it, is the Humanitarian Toolbox. So this is a charity that I've helped set up. We're actually a 501c3 in progress right now for building open source software for disaster relief.
Oh, great.
You go to htbox.org and sign up. We're going to start running more codeathons all over the planet. And there's a lot of software to be built to help save some lives during disasters.
Oh, that sounds like a great effort. Count me in. Whenever you come anywhere
long conversation all by itself. I didn't mean to build a charity. I just thought that I wanted to do more charitable things as a developer that made sustainable software, and this is the best solution I could find.
I totally agree with you. That's fantastic.
Well, and that gives me a chance to talk a little bit about a post that we had up on our site today about how Verizon actually donated $40,000 to a Hope Line, which is a domestic violence prevention agencies in and around the that's a big part of Verizon's push or whatever, but they actually donated to the Women's Safe House as well as Safe Connections. So we'll have all these links in our show notes. But first and foremost, again, thank you so much, Richard, for being on the show. It was so much fun. You had anytime you want to talk to us, if we didn't, totally freak you out or whatever by how much fanfare and the general conversation. We would love to have you back on and talk more about maybe your charity and maybe help raise some funds that way or whatever the case may be, because I'm all about that. But thank you so much for being on the show. We can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.
Gus, what are your final thoughts on the end of this wonderful episode?
Well, I thought this was a fantastic episode. Richard Campbell, you're a podcasting guru.
Yep.
And actually, believe it or not, a jack of all trades. I mean, we could talk about everything. We could have even gotten into scotch and wines and beers and everything else as well. And we tried to keep it as development technical savvy as we could. But and I love your geek outs. And I actually had nuclear questions on my plate. Never got to those either. So
that's all right.
So to be continued, everyone. So thank you again for being on the show, and thank you to all of our fans. We love and thank you so much for your support of the show. So from the entire STL Tech Talk crew, if you're into Battlestar Galactica, you'll understand what I say. Crew, good coding. We're out.